I am here. Bear's here, ready to go.
Sorry, sorry guys. What is the motion again?
Oh, for sure.
Something about the railroads.
Yes. Okay. I have 7 minutes 30 seconds on the clock. My name is Isaac House. I use they them pronouns. For POIs, just say POI out loud, and then I'll accept or reject it. We're all good.
Yeah.
Good to go.
Great. Well then I will begin my time now. Okay. Let's go through some definitions, and I'm gonna get into our 2 observations, then get into our 3 contention case. Firstly, what is the railway industry? It's a group of companies that transport goods through freight or individuals, passenger, by rail cars from one place to another. What is the nationalization of this? It would mean that the United States government would essentially buy up their stock to have hold and control, have control of these companies, take responsibility for them, kind of incorporate them within into government institutions, like for example the Department of Transportation. Observation 1, that there's been a number of high-profile train derailings that spilled toxic chemicals into the environment over the United States, and it was directly caused by corporate malfeasance and failure to have adequate safety precautions. This is the perfect time for the government to step in and be like, we think that these, evil corporate railways have took it too far, and now we have to do this right. The second observation is that the government doesn't need to sell this as nationalization, right? American Rail is already heavily subsidized. I think that it's, making about cutting red tape, removing inefficiencies, and putting it under the control of the people. I think the exact way this policy is sold should be the focus of the debate, but I think that it's reasonable to say they're going to smush most cries of, oh my God, America's becoming a socialist country. We're going to do socialism. I think that'll be fine. Our first contention is why the government is going to do a better job at running trains. Firstly, corporations have interest in making profit, and the government has an interest in making people happy / not making people angry. The government does not do a good job. The people who promises to make trains better gets voted into power, right? Essentially, railways are uniquely responsive. People can tell very easily if you aren't running trains correctly because they don't get their shipments in time, or you spill a bunch of toxic chemicals, right? Compare this to another issue like policing, where effectiveness becomes a matter of great subjective controversy. I think that government inefficiency within railways, when they have this direct control, not going to happen because there's going to be bipartisan support for stop doing this, do it better, invest way more money into this, invest in this way, and we want to see these very specific, agreed upon better results. And so we think that it's going to hold the government accountable. We're going to go into a few kind of sub-contentions about more specific things. First of these being is about better working conditions. Companies don't particularly care about their workers' conditions so long as they can make money. See Amazon with the famous thing about delivery truck drivers having to pee in bottles, not being able to have restroom breaks. Look at what happens to railway workers where they're on strike all the time because they get so few sick days. This is necessarily true because all companies care about per kind of definitionally is about providing value to their shareholders. We think that governments do care, firstly because the workers vote for them, also because the American public cares a lot, right? Observe that the strongest unions in the country are generally for government jobs. See teachers union, police unions, sanitation worker unions, etc. When the government runs a program, workers are going to have better conditions. This is good because less people dying in accidents are good, or being harmed by chemical waste is good, and also less people being incredibly overstressed is good. And we also think that this generally means they're going to be doing a better job, trains are going to run better, people are going to have better service on their trains. It's all going to go well. Second sub contention here is about it being cheaper. Right? Corporations want as much profit as they can get. Right? What is the highest that I can charge for this? And still there's some kind of the curves intersect, right? Where is the highest price I can pay while getting the most tickets thing to make the most money? Governments don't really care about how much money they make from these programs because government revenue comes almost all from taxation, not profit. So government programs are usually free, like public schools, or operate at cost and only result in a very small price to the American public, like, the post office, right? You have to pay like 25 cents for a nice stamp. Third subcategory is about safety, right? Corporations make a calculation. Is the money that I will gain making my product, unsafe, worth the money that I will lose to lawsuits when people get killed, and like also through like the hypothetically greater efficiency and speed of transporting goods, right? And usually they opt for making stuff at least somewhat unsafe. You can see like Ford did this with their cars in the 1970s, and government, obviously for reasons above, doesn't do this because the government directly causing like a massive train accident is really, really bad for the government in a way that and like the individuals who work for the government in a way that it's not bad for the corporations. It costs them more than profit. It costs them like the existence of those individuals' jobs. Fourth point is about innovation. We think that corporate innovation is focused on profit. Government motivation is focused on the public good. Right? Governments want to develop vaccines. They can help, fast track an mRNA COVID vaccine, then the company takes it and, sells it for a high value. Even though, for example, the government is subsidizing like these corporations. The same thing happens with innovations in United States railways. We think the fact that it's been so incredibly corporate controlled for so long is part of why the United States is so behind, other countries like Japan or China. We don't have very much high-speed rail at all. And our fourth point is about expansion, right? Corporations must make money for the things they do. We repeat, governments can't take losses, right? The people who live in comparatively low density and hard to reach areas would like to have trains because trains are useful and they allow cheap transportation without the need of a car, right? But corporations are very unlikely to send to create rail lines there because it's not profitable for them, particularly in the short term. On the other hand, governments are going to be equitable. There's going to be some representative from, this whatever, maybe the Adirondacks who's like, we want a train here and push for that and, lobby for that. And we then, trains happen there and the people in this situation are better. And overall, this is more economic efficiency and goods are transported faster. Workers within these areas are better off. People can get the things that they need. Our second contention is about a public relations win for Biden. Right, people like it when the services they use are less expensive. If I have to pay more money for something and now I have to pay less money for it, I'm happy. You think that Biden's going to make trains less expensive? That's how he frames it. This is what Biden's speech is going to be like. We are breaking down the system of red tape or supposedly for-profit corporations that rely almost entirely on government subsidies, and we're going to help provide this service more freely to you, the people of the United States of America. The people's response: yes, thank you, Joe Biden, for doing this action. It makes your life easier. We will be sure to vote for you. Of course, it might not be quite that simple, but generally we think that if you do something and you can claim it and be like, this is making this thing cheaper for you and making your daily life easier, you're going to be a lot more likely to vote for that person. I think that's pretty clear. Why is it good for Biden to win the election? Democrats are on the right side of history and Republicans are on the wrong side of history. The Republicans are trying to overturn the rule of law and democratic processes through January 6th, election results and nothing. They're also incredibly deeply transphobic, trying to remove the ability to transition on the local level from transgender people. I think that's really, really bad. Democrats are not trying to do these things, and so we want people who are not trying to do these things to win the election. Ignore what I said about the third contention. I'm very sorry. Thank you so much, and please vote for the government.
All right. For a brief off-time roadmap, I'm just going to go over the negative case and then the affirmative case in the order in which it was read. Is anyone not ready? Cool. Then 8 minutes. Time starts now. We negate the resolution the United States federal government should nationalize the railway industry. Let's get into our first disadvantage, which is going to be that of nuclear rail. In the uniqueness, first, we see nuclear rail is happening right now. So point A is that in the last decade, the U.S. Patent Office has processed numerous patents related to the usage of nuclear reactors to power the trains. So point B is this works pretty similar to nuclear reactors powering submarines, etc. It's pretty intuitive. So point C is that currently it has a massive upside when it comes to energy efficiency for the railroad industry, reducing cost on the consumer. Second is going to be that thorium development is spilling over right now. So point A is that thorium reactor development is at an all-time high right now. We'll explain what thorium reactors are in a little more detail later. But so point B is that India and China have invested multi-billion-dollar large-scale innovations with the industry. This is spilling over into the United States because, again, when this technology develops, especially with an ally like India, the United States is also going to see developments in the sector. And third is going to be that traditional roads are unsustainable. So point A is that the U.S. annual spending is over $110 billion on roads and upkeep, cheap. And so point B is the NHTSA estimates that the car crashes cost the United States $340 billion alone. So again, we're going to need private sector innovation in this area in order to make it preferable to this basically, traditional roads that we're using right now. The links are going to be first that there's going to be a not so baller policy passed. The federal government takes over the railway industry. So point one is this the first link is that this stifles innovation. The federal government, as the affirmatives themselves will say, will attempt to reduce the costs immediately as much as they can. Our opponents are telling you that they're going to effectively make this service free, and they'll try to minimize risks. Again, risks as in investing in technology, which might not necessarily be, in terms of consumers, what looks like the most safe investment. It takes individuals with more drive. It takes individuals with, again, the entrepreneurial ability to see this and take this risk without, again, literally the entire public looking at them, to invest in this technology that's going to be the future. The government has no incentive to actually innovate. It just has an incentive to provide what is there and provide what their constituents are going to be happy enough with. And second is going to be thorium development on this is on the small scale train reactors is going to be cut off at the point at which, again, it is private industries that are investing in this. Really, there's no substantial public sector investment.
Eli?
Yeah.
If the government did something for you that made you particularly happy, would you be more likely to vote for the government?
Yes, probably, but I'd also say that the government generally isn't going to be thinking that it's going to make people happy by investing in thorium reactors, because generally the government sees this as a risk, and probably the public would agree, because the public eye is on the government, and especially for Republicans who are generally opposed to large government spending, which would require taxation. Risky investments like this have been things that Obama has been criticized for investing in renewables in general, even when it was established renewables like solar, things like that. So probably the government is not going to make people happy like this. It takes time to see the benefits of these things, which means the private sector has to prove it's beneficial before it can happen, and only the private sector can do this because the government has the government has the burden of proving it's beneficial before the technology is even implemented. The private sector has the burden of proving it afterwards. Then to get onto the internal links. The internal links are first, nuclear energy is key to high-speed rail. So point A is two scenarios. First, the nuclear energy grids are the only way to make this happen. Stopping the investment into nuclear energy-backed high-speed rail is going to happen because the United States federal government doesn't want to take on a big cost when it comes to rail. But again, you need sustainable electricity, one that can happen 24/7, i.e. nuclear, unlike the other renewables, in order to have a sustainable grid for high-speed rail. And second is going to be nuclear reactors on the trains. This is a more novel innovation, and there isn't any reason for the government to invest themselves, again, because of the risk. They have to prove it's a good technology before it exists, whereas private can prove it after. Again, proving the payoff later. Second is going to be high-speed rail, as key to a lot of other things. Sorry, I'll take it at the end if I have time. First, it's going to be reduced emissions, just generally because nuclear energy is a zero emissions technology. So point B is that it's increased accessibility because it's going to, again, cost a lot less. And C is going to be it's key to safety because there's 36,000 fatal car crashes a year in the United States. And so point 3 is going to be thorium. An innovation on microreactors is key to thorium development. And this increases effectively things like enrichment technology. And thorium also has basically very, very low nuclear waste that's much easier to deal with. So the counter plan is going to be the United States federal government should significantly increase its investment into liquid fluoride thorium reactors. This is going to be done as soon as possible through normal ways and means, and my partner can put it in the chat. The solvency are going to be first. Liquid thorium reactors are known as molten salt reactors powered by thorium fluoride salts, in which the thorium undergoes the process of fission, which heats and melts fluoride salts and generates heat and spins a turbine. So the point is, this is different from traditional fission reactors, which simply have a fission reaction, generate heat up the water to turn a turbine under extreme pressure. And so point B is the usage of molten salt allows for, again, basically a generally safer reactor type, which has a very, very low chance, or effectively a theoretically 0% chance of melting down. Second is going to be the nuclear waste. So point A is that lifters are far more efficient than traditional reactors. Thorium is about 500 times more abundant than the most abundant uranium-238. And so point B is that after the first round of reaction, lifters can effectively continue to use this material rather than basically using it up once and then getting rid of it in whatever a silo. Third is going to be cost. The cost of nuclear fuel, etc., is going to be lower since thorium is roughly 2+ orders of magnitude more abundant than any uranium isotope. And fourth is going to encourage high-speed rail development. So point A is increasing grid capacity and stability increases the capacity for high-speed rail projects. And so point B, high-speed rail has an incredibly high demand, or energy demand, and that can only be met in a green energy manner through nuclear energy. This is going to be competitive through net benefits because, again, if we don't have a private sector to actually support this growth of this technology to really invest in, because we're going to be nationalizing the rail, then this counterplan is going to fail. Only in a private sector which can, again, look to see the risk of taking this, the risk of investing around this counterplan is one where it's going to succeed. The second disadvantage is then going to be that of politics. In the uniqueness, first, we see Biden is running for re-election. Biden has been planning for re-election with top campaign officials, and Democratic Congresspeople says that everyone's operating under the assumption that he will. Second is Trump is also running for re-election with little opposition, but needs an issue to unify the voters. Trump announced that he would be running for re-election and is still uncontested as of 2023, but 40% of Republicans who said that Trump should not run again. But if he doesn't have an opponent, they're probably going to maybe be forced to vote for him. Third is going to be that Biden has scaled down on large spending projects in order to again win the election like our opponents are predicting he will. Biden has again passed landmark infrastructure bills and the Inflation Reduction Act, but does not appear to have any other large bills slated currently. And so point B is that reports show that Democratic Congresspeople have been growing more cautious around Biden as they have to consider their re-election prospects as of March 28th, 2023, which means again not taking more left-like wing policy measures. The links are going to be first, the U.S. literally buys the railroads. The point A is this is a massive government overreach in the eyes of Republicans. B is it's going to cost massive amounts of money. One railroad company posted that they make $25 billion a year, meaning buying all of these would take at least $100 billion, if not $1 trillion operation, considering this would be permanent, and that was just 1 year of profit. And so point C is that it uses up remaining political capital, even if Biden is reelected. Look to the Democrats being worried about any radical action from Biden literally right before this reelection time, losing their trust in his general tactics. The internal links are going to be first, or Trump wins the next election instead of Biden. Again, Biden is looking like the favorite considering the amount of people who don't want to vote for Trump. But this is not going to happen when Biden passes a radical policy and all the Congress people are going to be like, hey, no, actually, we're not going to support Biden anymore. And this means Biden or the Democrats can't pass key policy like infrastructure, inflation, and security and climate change. This increases poverty. And like our opponents tell you, a lot of other matters for death and dehumanization, as well as climate change, which could cause 1 billion people to be displaced by 2100 due to sea level rise and 70+ trillion in infrastructural damages if we don't avoid significant warming. Now, I'll get onto an overview of the affirmative. On the affirmative, there is little unique offense here that tells you why the affirmative is a good idea. There's instead more of an advertisement of rail. We stand rail, okay? So they tell you that there's going to be substantial investments, and really they just tell you the government's going to be better in terms of profit and safety. That's the only unique argument they have, but this isn't going to be true for a couple of reasons. First is just going to be the fact that these companies are going to be massively impacted by damages from things like lawsuits. It would crush them. And also, again, the government does not have the innovation to increase safety like the private sector does. So on net, in the long term, even if you don't buy in the short term, we're seeing a loss in safety and a loss in innovation.
All right. Is everyone ready?
Yep.
Cool. In that case, just a quick off-time roadmap. I'm going to go over the counter plan, and then I'll go op case, then gov case. Hopefully just give you some reasons to vote for us. If everyone's ready, I will start my time now. Okay, let's start off with the counter plan. I'm not going to lie to you. This made zero sense to me. They say we are going to invest in nuclear reactors. How this is related at all to the motion of governments nationalizing industries is not clear to me. I think this is called a perm and West Coast, whatever. Their counter plan is not mutually exclusive. Judges, ask yourself, can we simultaneously invest in nuclear reactors and also nationalize the railway industry? The answer is yes, governments can do two things at once. Why does OP say that this is like not mutually exclusive? They say, oh, because if there isn't a private sector to exist, then how can the government invest in something? First off, no. If their entire case is right, then it means that investing in like this things is like good for the railway industry, and the government is going to be able to see that it's good for the railway industry. First, second, like the government cares somewhat, or actually to a large extent, especially Democrats, about creating renewable energy. This is renewable. Look at all the reasons they tell you this is a good idea. And third, like government does something because the taxpayers either support it or don't, not because of like the private sector existing. So if you believe that the public is going to support this, then they're going to be able to do this. And if the public doesn't support this, they won't be able to do this. It has nothing to do with like whether or not we nationalize anything. This is not a exclusive counterplan. So let's talk about what OP tells you about nuclear rail. Their first contention is like, oh yeah, nuclear rail is like a good thing and we should do it. I have a couple of responses to this because like opposition gives you a lot of technical jargon and like talks a lot about like thorium reactors and a bunch of stuff, which I'm not going to lie to you, I didn't understand. But they miss out on like the crucial thing which they need to convince you of, which is why are private companies more likely to invest in this technology than the government? They simply say that companies care about like risk and government companies are able to take risks and governments aren't, without actually giving you any reasons reasons why. We on site government believe that actually the opposite is true. Why is the opposite true? What countries right now are doing the best in investing in renewable technology for their railways? Oh, China. Oh, Japan. The things that my partner told you. Countries which are incidentally have nationalized railway industries. So evidently their governments don't have too much of a problem with this. And so why should ours? The reason is, I think the governments are actually better at long-term risk than corporations. How does a government work versus how does a company work? A company has to give continuous money to their shareholders. If I buy a company, I want dividends or I want the stock price to go up. I invest because they will give me money like soon, not later. As investors, we want short-term benefit because we aren't going to be alive long enough to see like the end results of our actions, right? And so if a company is like, hey, investors, guys, we're going to like take a huge hit for the next 10 years. And then like maybe after that, it's going to like maybe have some technology to give us a little competitive edge. Like the investors are just going to be like, no, screw you. I have to like put my kid through college or whatever. So I want you to give me the money now. Companies are, as a result, much more short-term focused. However, governments have a large reserve of slush funds that they can spend on things like innovation. Why was the space race done by the government? Like, we were able to spend all of these things, which allowed us to develop technologies, like, in the long run, which either wouldn't benefit us at all or, like, would benefit us very later down the line. Why is this? Because governments have money that they can spend and they can convince voters that, like, this is going to be good in the long run. And then they're going to be able to do it. Second reason here is that governments uniquely care about stopping climate change. Like they see, like Op tells you the Gov sees thorium as a risk and Obama was criticized for renewables. I think this admission is like going to lose them the entire round. Obama, for one thing, wasn't criticized by renewables. But like judges, I don't know if you've like listened to a Democrat talk in the last 3 years, but they won't shut up about renewables. Why? Because the American public is now recognizing that climate change is a problem, and the entirety of Biden's platform was built around him switching us to renewable energies. This is the entirety of the thing that he's arguing. So if the government's like, guys, by the way, like we're going to do a thing which will increase the amount of renewable energy that we have, then the public is going to be like, great, good job, Biden. You're finally doing your job. I'm going to get to this a little bit later. Furthermore, companies comparatively do not care about climate change because, as we said, they only care about getting money. They only care about their shareholders. So they're not going to do risk, and they're specifically not going to do risk, which is going to, like, you know, do climate change because they don't care about climate change. Okay, they say nuclear energy is really good. Like, whatever, sure, probably. I think that this probably isn't going to win them the round. Why is it not going to win us the round? We are going to win on the second contention that they tell you, which is politics. Why do, like, because we say that this is going to be better for Biden. Why do we say it's going to be better for Biden? Because, like, the American public likes it when the government does a good thing. Like, if you're somebody who lives in, like, rural Arkansas or something, and the government's like, hey, and you work for a train company, and your friend just died because the railway companies didn't have enough safety regulations, and the government is like, hey, we're going to nationalize, we're going to give you a good paying job, and we're going to make sure that like you guys don't have to deal with this anymore, you're going to like the government more. Like people like it when government does things for them. So what does Ob tell you? They say like Biden is scaling down spending because quote unquote Democrats are worried about being too radical. I think that this is just a fundamental misevaluation of how the political system operates right now. Democrats aren't getting things passed because, like, I don't know, shocker, Republicans control the House, and so they literally can't get anything passed. That's why they're not doing anything. It's not because they're, like, worried about re-election. Second, they say that Democrats are worried about being too radical, just like judges. Why? Why are Democrats worried about doing something which is too radical? We tell you on SideGov that, like, the American public wants you to do things which help their lives. And like Biden has a reputation right now for being someone who's too weak to actually do anything because, again, Republicans control the House and the Senate. And like, or they don't control the Senate, but they control the House. Government is like, Biden is ineffective. He's not doing enough, whatever. This is actually where Trump's appeal comes from. Trump's appeal in 2016 was the establishment isn't helping everyday Americans. I'm going to actually do things and get things done. And that's why I'm going to win over Hillary Clinton. And then people voted for it, especially people like who feel that they've been left aside by the establishment, like people who are like struggling, the kinds of people who would work on trains, on railways. And so like, also in terms of solvency, like per the motion, the power exists. Also, I'd just like to point out a further thing, which is that if this actually gets passed, it's going to be bipartisan because Republicans control the House, it passes the House. Democrats control the Senate, it passes the Senate. So, like, great. Now, not only is Biden getting this great thing done, but he's doing it in a bipartisan way. He's actually able to make Washington work. Like, this is a massive PR victory for him. So we think that we win the populists, the people who are most likely to vote for Trump because they perceive that the government isn't doing anything for them, and people want the government to help them. And like, we're not like, maybe there's like some like Reaganite Republican who's like 80 years old who's like, oh my God, I don't want the government to do anything. But like, he's not going to vote for Biden anyway. That's just not going to impact Biden's chance of getting elected. It's the populists who voted for Trump instead of Clinton in 2016 that are going to get him to win. Then government overreach again. Like, this isn't actually going to cost the government that much more because we are already functionally propping up the railway industry, as our partner said. We're spending like trillions of dollars in subsidies right now. We actually just like stop paying those subsidies and we just like do it ourselves. It's not going to cost that much more money. Cost political capital. This isn't how political capital works. It's not like you have to spend money to get things passed. If the public likes the thing that you get, it gives you legitimacy and allows you to pass more things. I think the bottom line here is that like OP never effectively deals with our contentions, especially the second one as to why we tell you that this is going to be really great for Biden. And because of this, like, they tell you, guess what? The railway line, like having investment in thorium or whatever, is completely path dependent on Democrats being in office and continuing to invest in this. If Trump wins, not only does OP get no benefits, but they actually lose because Trump's going to like kneecap any climate change legislation. He's also going to like oppress trans people and do a lot of bad stuff. I think that this is where the round's going to be won and lost. But for what it's worth, they also didn't address our first contention. They just said, oh, they say profit and safety and they don't have any points. We actually did have points. They just didn't address them. Companies impacted by damages. No, they're literally not. Look at Ford in the 1970s. They literally calculated it would be less money to pay off damages than the money it would take to do the safety features. Generally, safety is expensive. And government innovation. We give you warrants. They don't respond to them. It's for those reasons that we strongly urge a government ballot.
Baller, swell. Okay. Order of this speech is going to be the neg in order, and then the AF case. Or overview on top, neg in order, AF in order. With that, we all ballin'. I'm gonna take that.
Yep.
Cool. All right, then, 8 minutes. My time starts now. Judge, we're going to be winning this round at the point at which the AF fundamentally misunderstands how political capital and the United States federal government works. But let's first go into the whole nuclear rail disadvantage, because I just really like this disadvantage, not necessarily because it makes a lot of sense, but just because I like the word like nuclear, and I also like rail. Okay. Into the nuclear rail thing proper. They have a couple of responses up top. They first tell you that like countries are going to be doing what's best for renewable energy, and that countries are also going to be the best for innovation. They tell you to look to like China and Japan as to like places that have nationalized railways and like also are the ones with the best railway systems. We tell you that unfortunately this is not the case for the United States. The United States federal government is really hold up, I'll censor myself. Okay, is really annoying. The culture of the United States has been like extremely anti-public transportation for the longest time, and only slowly are we coming around. You can like see this by the fact that like while a ton of other countries, you can especially look to like Europe and stuff, while they invested heavily in public transportation, the United States invested a lot more into the highway system, which is why we have like super massive automotive industries, and why we have a ton of like money going every year into maintaining and building more and more roads. The United States has an incredibly car-based culture, and as a result, the United States just is not very open to the prospect of actually like shifting towards public transportation inherently. We tell you that like this is slowly happening in the status quo, in which there is more and more appreciation for public transportation, especially in light of seeing the like overall benefits when it comes to reduction in emissions and a reduction in costs. However, we tell you that the affirmative case essentially uses all the political capital of the Democrats by essentially nationalizing it, which means that they essentially take away from anything else or like any other big agenda item in their political agenda, I guess. Given that they themselves concede that the Republicans control the control the House, would probably mean this. Give me a second, and yeah, I'll take it. But it essentially means that they are then not able to pass a ton of other policy. The way political capital works is that you have a certain amount of political capital. You can use this for really, really big ticket items, but what this means is that you then have to make concessions to the other party based essentially proportional to the share that you hold within the governing body. We tell you that at the point at which nationalizing rail itself is going to be a near $1 trillion endeavor, is probably going to mean that you're going to be using a massive amount of that political capital, and it's going to scale back any other significant democratic policy that they try to pass, which also means you're going to be scaling back any of the momentum of the public transportation in the status quo. Yeah, your question.
Given that there's only a year before the election and Republicans control the House, genuinely, what else do you think Democrats are going to pass with their apparently massive amount of political capital?
We never say that there's a massive amount of political capital. Our argument here is that you shoot all political capital, you also hinder future political capital. It's not just yes, money in the bank, but April 15th is coming in 14 days, I don't know, and we're gonna get our payday. Wait, no, that's tax day. I don't really know how this works. Anyways, it's not that our political capital payday is coming and everything's going to be resolved then, but rather you shoot yourself in the foot when it comes to future political capital. Moving forward, on the rest of the uniqueness, they also tell you that the government is better at long-term investment, and they give you the example of the space race. The space race is only possible because of an insane public fixation upon space. There aren't 4 people more horny for high-speed rail than me and my boy Garv. Okay. They also tell you that governments inherently care about climate change, and Democrats won't shut up about renewables. They can see that Biden hasn't invested in advanced tech like lifters, liquid thorium fluoride reactors, and what about the other half of the United States? Republicans, companies that can fill small niches with investors who see the potential of lifters and need need for renewables. The government must be accountable to the whole of the U.S., which is not sold on either of those facts, or officials lose government office, which essentially means that it doesn't happen. With that, you can extend the entirety of the links on the disadvantage, which means that if there's any risk of offense here, you're going to be voting for the negation immediately, given that they cold concede all of the links. This means that you buy everything under the essentially links of nuclear energy, and specifically of high-speed rail. On the counterplan.
POI?
I'll take it at the end if I have time, sorry. On the counterplan, they have essentially one argument here, which is that it doesn't really make sense and it's not related. But first, lifters are always related. But second, the argument here is that it is competitive through net benefits, and specifically through political capital, essentially because only the private sector, only the private sector is significantly investing in lifters right now, because the government has to prove it's a good and before it's developed, and the private can prove it afterwards. Essentially, what this means is that we need government investment to happen now. We tell you that when you use up all the political capital and you use this massive $1 trillion plan to buy up all of national rail, or to nationalize rail, it essentially means that you take away all the momentum and all the space for Democrats to do additional things, such as put 50 billion additional big dollary dues into lifters, which probably means they don't get access to the perm argument. Cool. With that, you can extend everything we tell you as to why lifters are super radical, and why they're really efficient, and why they're also really cost efficient. On the dissat on politics, the overview here is the fundamental issue of the affirmative is that their understanding of the United States government is just kind of wrong. The government doesn't work automatically and just decide policy because one group of thought within a niche of voters doesn't just immediately determine policy. If so, all of the harms of the status quo outlined by this outlined within the status quo by side gov would already be resolved, because the political capital because essentially people would already have issues with certain things, and so they would automatically have their representatives be voting for the perfect policies for them, but that doesn't happen. On the uniqueness level, first, they concede that Biden will win the status quo because 40% of Republicans just don't want Trump to win. The AF just takes a risk, and a big one, that Republicans unify against the Democratic government and against the democratic government's like overreach in spending, and Trump wins the election. They essentially don't really have any other like primary responses. Their only other thing is that like this kind of fiat argument that the bill will be bipartisan because the Republicans control the House and thus like they pass it. We tell you the way fiat works is essentially that like you get the guarantee that the bill passes. However, you do not get the guarantee that you then ideologically change all of Republicans. So this probably means that at best you get a few fringe moderate Republicans, but moreover, this probably means that they are going to go and defect back to party lines because they're already stuck their neck out against party lines, which means that you're going to be continuing to buy the entirety of the rest of the internal link scenario because my opponents fundamentally just don't have responses here, which means that which means that they're only going to be risking Trump winning in the status quo, or Trump winning, which means that if you buy any of the harms here, any of the impacts which they have no responses to, you're going to be voting for the neg. On the AF as an overview, you can kind of do a lot of cross applications here. They also just like fundamentally don't really have many impacts here, which probably means you're not going to be buying any of their arguments. They also just don't extend anything in the MG, so don't allow shadow extensions in the PMR.
All right. 4 minutes. This is mostly just going to be an overview of the round. I'll talk about sort of the our opponent's first advantage and our first disadvantage in the counter plan, and then I'll move on to our second disadvantage and then the opponent's second advantage. Is anyone not ready? Cool. And 4 minutes. Time starts now. We're going to be winning this round at the point at which, our opponents haven't really proven that rail is going to be substantially more safe or that innovation is going to be protected by governments. They've only proven that nationalization happens to have also happened where they say that innovation is doing the best, i.e. China and Japan. Well, China also was one of the countries that had massive investment in technology like lifters in the private sector, so that argument probably goes both ways, but either way, there's going to be fundamentally outweighed and there's going to be an easy ballot for the negative on the point of politics, because basically both sides in this debate agree this is the biggest magnitude. Again, our opponents talk about things like safety, talk about things like, again, making sure the government is accountable or making the people happy, but this is going to be outweighed at the point at which they concede 1 billion people are at risk of being displaced by 2100 if we do not address climate change. There's going to be $70+ trillion of infrastructural damage worldwide if we do not address climate change. At the point at which these are the biggest issues in the round, these are the ones that would affect literally the livelihoods, not necessarily just whether or not they're generally happy with the state of the government, literally whether or not they're going to be able to keep living in their homes, whether or not they're going to be able to keep living at all, is the issue of climate change, is the issue of which party effectively is going to control the government. Then this needs to be where the ballot is signed, and this is where the negative is the most ahead. First, I'll move on to addressing effectively the affirmative advantage in the context of our first disadvantage. In response to our first disadvantage, again, they basically just say that these countries, Japan, China, have, again, nationalized railway, and that basically the space race was done, but that was, again, because there is a lot of public interest. They're going to say that the government is actually going to be better in terms of the long-term investment, but this isn't true at the point at which they concede that the government quite literally has to be accountable to anyone. They cannot move too far to the right or the left on the political spectrum, otherwise they'll just be kicked out of office when they don't have enough support in order to get that effectively 50%, to strike that balance. Whereas companies can fill small niches. There are companies that take risky investments, and they get money from investors who are willing to take those risks. They do not need to have the support of the entirety of the United States, and that is what allows them to invest in lifters. The basically nail in the coffin for the affirmative on this point is going to be the fact that they concede, even though Democrats have been always saying that we need renewable energy, they haven't invested in lifters yet, but guess what? Who has? The private sector, which means all of the advantages of this nuclear technology only happen in a sector that is willing to invest in it. If we nationalize it, then we lose the advantages of a technology that is cheaper, a technology that is faster, a technology that is more accessible towards these individuals. If we have not seen this investment from the government in the past, and there's no reason we would see these improvements in accessibility in the future. We just stay stuck in a current system that our opponents tell you is outdated and bad. But now let's move on to the second disadvantage. We're going to be winning the second disadvantage for a couple of reasons. Now they're going to get up and say, but this is going to be a massive point for Biden. It's going to be bipartisan. Everyone's going to love what he's done. But the fact of the matter is, the benefits of nationalizing this railway system are maybe seen 10 years down the line. But the election is coming up again within this coming year, which means that what Biden has to do is prove that he's making policies that are going to be like good for the voters or good in the eyes of the voters right after he passes them. And at the point at which the government, generally Republicans are strongly opposed to government overreach, literally taking over private companies, at the point at which they're opposed to trillion-dollar projects, and at the point at which our opponents concede that Democrats, even Democrats within Congress, are telling them that they're not going to be willing to side with Biden if he continues radical policy or if he pushes for radical policy. This means that this is going to be an overreach, even if it has benefits down the line, that is going to let Republicans be elected in the next term, which is going to lead to things like climate change being unresolved, like our opponents effectively agree on. At the point at which this is true, again, Trump is not going to be reelected in the status quo. We proved this at the point at which 40% of Republicans don't even want Trump to go again, to be effectively running again for office. But the affirmative only risks this. And even if Trump doesn't win the next election, they have again alienated these Congress people that are saying they're no longer going to support Biden, which means any of the policy that needs to be addressed to tackle climate change is going to be moot. Our opponents will say this is a good policy, but at the very least, it depends on the eyes of the public, the eyes of these Congress people, and both of which have said, no, we do not support this. So no, Democrats would not have the power to pass the policies they need to. It simply isn't worth the risk.
Great. Fab. Everyone ready? Take that as a yes. No objections.
We ballin'.
I'm gonna put it, and just off time roadmap. I'm going to go through kind of, the new stuff they said, do rebuttals to that, and then I'm gonna get into weighing. So I'm going to begin my time now. So essentially, in our opponent's speech, what they do is, they ask us and, you judges kind of questions, right? Firstly, they ask, does our counter plan make sense? They say, no, not really. Actually, I just like, saying the word nuclear railroad. And yes, it's a gag. I appreciate it as a gag. But also, I think it reveals a kind of philosophy of like treating debate as a game, of like looking for like the one kind of possible, maybe slightly more efficient use of government money and then doing it, right? I think that you can have the counter plan nearly every motion about government spending, that it should be about like sending mosquito nets to like impoverished countries in Africa. And that is absolutely going to save the most lives. But ultimately, clearly it's atopical, clearly it's non-unique, right? Let's talk about the motion. I think this is pretty clear. Don't treat debate just as a game. Then they say, isn't the United States federal government not going to do anything good because of card culture? And then they kind of admit, oh, but the United States is changing its changing its attitude towards card culture. We see kind of an anti-card bit going up. And I think that if the United States government is now going to buy the railroad industry, I think they're going to invest in the railroad industry. I don't think that's a unbelievable thing, particularly considering that our opponents themselves can see that there's a change, can see that currently we have a kind of pro-public transportation people in office at this moment. Opponents talk about kind of political capital, could the governments pass something like this, right? And our point isn't fiat, it gets passed and everyone's suddenly going to agree with us, but it's fiat, it gets passed and the people are impressed that something is getting passed, and that's a good thing, right? On the other hand, subsidies are kind of happen on the download of the political process. People don't care as much because it's not policy, it's just the distribution of money. It's not something directly impact their lives in the same way. So they see this big change and we think that people like it. And then our opponents make this point about voters want immediate benefits, right? And this kind of policies are going to work because it's not an immediate benefit to the people, and they screw us over because it's such a big amount of money. Our opponents failed to address throughout their speeches essentially I believe it was our second observation from our first speech, which is that there was just a massive train accident releasing an absurd amount of carcinogens due to corporate malfeasance, right? And this means that the policy, that this is the exact right time for the government to step in and be corporations have gone too far, and we need to stop it, and people will support it because it's yes, there's this piece of evidence that's right in our mind about how terrible corporate run trains are. I think that's pretty indisputable, honestly. I think that our opponents have not responded to that. I think it's very clear that I'd be pretty hyped. This terrible thing is happening. The government comes in and says, we recognize this terrible thing happened, and we're now taking these many steps to stop these terrible things from happening again. Right? We're responding to this national tragedy. That is a good PR thing. I think it's hard to just go exactly into the psyche of people, but I think it's evidence that you responding to a national disaster, saying we're going to do this policy to stop this national disaster from happening again, is actually feels clear and immediate to a voter. Now let's get into weighing, and let's relate back to the motion, right? Which is, what are the reasons that each side gives as to the why the United States government should nationalize or should not nationalize? We provide, two major reasons. Firstly, we say if they nationalize, it's going to be better, right? It's going to be better for people. It's like the train systems are going to run better. We give all these reasons for unresponded to. Just to repeat a few of them. Workers are going to be paid better and have better conditions. That's like that tens of thousands of people's lives being clearly and noticeably improved because they're being paid better and have better conditions and can like unionize better because government unions are more effective. They're going to they're going to not do train accidents anymore. So we see like less people having carcinogens released into them and their children's bodies. I think this is a very good thing. I think that is like thousands of lives worth. And then secondly, we say it's going to improve our election chances. It's going to be really popular when Biden does this because it's responding to a national emergency. And also it's going to like directly improve the lives of the people because trains are going to be cheaper, right? Maybe some of these long-term stuff about like greater service are kind of maybe a little bit more indistinguishable. The idea that like the government's going to buy and they're going to make it cheaper, I think we essentially put into our plan and our opponents have not responded to. These are all the reasons why people are going to like it. What do our opponents say? They say, oh, essentially, like Republicans are going to be so kind of enraged and pushed off by this. They're no longer going to vote for Biden anymore. It's too radical of a move. And I just feel like people want radical, dramatic moves when a national tragedy happens, when like, what East Palestine, Ohio happens. And so this response like feels justified and it feels like good to people. And then secondly, our opponents say the United States government should not nationalize the rail industry because they should put subsidies into investing in technology for the rail industry. Pausing my time because I didn't understand what was being said.
Yeah, sorry, point of order.
Yeah.
I think the argument that there will not be a response to this radical action that is unfavorable simply because it is in response to a national tragedy is new. I think especially its application to the Congress people that are Democratic or generally Republicans. I don't think that argument was made, but I could have just missed it.
We'll take it under consideration.
Okay. Just to point it out on the flow, I said it in my second observation. I'm pretty sure I applied it in those places. I have 37 seconds left, including grace. Is that right? Okay. I'm going to resume my time. Now, so I suppose say the United States government should not nationalize the rail industry because they should put subsidies into this technology relating to the rail industry. That's just not a coherent argument. That's just like I don't understand how that counterplan works. Counterplans, in my understanding, should be directly oppositional to like what's going on, should somehow relate to like the object that is being changed here in this situation, the rail industry, and not just we should be investing in this technology. Opponents provide some reasons as to maybe the government is slightly less incentivized to invest in this technology on the other side. My partner provides reasons as to why that's not really the case. But even looking at it, when you see we're going to win the election, protect trans people, whatever, when we're going to have a rail system that's not killing people, that's giving people better rights, I think for all these reasons, you should clearly vote for the government. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We will
So that was really fun.
Yeah, thank
make
you.
our decisions.
Good debate.
I do believe we have a decision here, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, fine.
Um,
I'm here with this.
are you guys ready for? Looks like you're ready to go. Okay. It was a split 1-1 decision in this debate. I'll start off. I first voted for the government side, and I will kind of walk through why I did that. So I think that the neg side for me isn't doing enough to explain why the USFG would buy up these assets to railway and then kind of just throw away these seemingly very valuable nuclear patents that are like key to high speed rail, which is also a priority of the USFG and the Democrats. So I'm just not really compelled that the Democratic congressman or the like government would like acquire this stuff and then just be like, nah, we're not at least gonna like try it or continue to R&D it. Like I'm just not sold on why your link arguments about risk analysis just aren't compelling enough to me in light of the AF responses about how a nuclear tech and public transit and high speed rail specifically are key priorities for the government and for Biden administration as well. And so it's just I don't really see why the private sector is needed for this to continue necessarily, especially in a world of a permutation. There's also not really a reason why the private sector couldn't continue to invest in this as well, or like other manifestations of it. So I just think your link arguments for me on the nuclear rail dissat are pretty tenuous. And then I look to the counter plan, and I do buy that it is totally possible for the US federal government to nationalize the industry while simultaneously investing in this technology in the future, which would then unlock future high-speed rail. So that kind of means that the counter plan becomes like a non-issue as well in terms of like it not really being exclusive. And then I look to politics, and I kind of just think the link debate is a huge wash here. I was kind of waiting for someone to just tell me that like none of this matters because the Trump indictments are probably going to end up being a way bigger factor in all of this election stuff than like a policy to nationalize what's already a heavily subsidized, publicly subsidized system. So at the end of the day, like, yeah, I think there's some risk that Biden takes a hit for like overreach. But my biggest problem and why I can't vote for you on this dissad for the neg is that you're not winning enough AF solvency arguments to compel me to believe this won't work. So like in order for me to believe that Biden's going to take a massive hit for this and it's going to be like terrible, you need to be giving me arguments like there's going to be more East Palestines in order the AF because of public mismanagement. And I'm not getting any of those core solvency arguments to compel me why the AF solvency won't work. And so if I believe that the AF solvency will actually, at a minimum be not as bad as the corporate system of the status quo, then I just think all your link arguments kind of go away because then Biden can sell that as a win, as like, oh, look, we reduced the red tape, all the stuff the AF's telling us out of the first speech about their ability to be like, hey, we're reducing corporate profiteering, we're increasing safety. If I believe that the AF can solve for those things, which I do based upon the solvency arguments given and the ones not given by the neg, then I just think that it's really an uphill battle on politics. And I kind of just think that dissad ends up being a wash. So at the end of the day, I don't really buy the links to the first dissad. I think the counter plan is permeable. And I think on politics, it's like a wash at best for the neg. But I think there's probably a little bit more offense carrying for the gov on that dissad as well. So that's kind of how I came to my decision. Hopefully that was clear. If there's any questions, feel free to follow up after the other judge gives their decision as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for such an outline feedback. I, on the other hand, thought that the opposite team was more convincing on the issue of solvency, and it seemed to me that they present a more convincing case that the U.S. government is unlikely to adopt radical measures for short-term gains, given the approaching elections, as opposed to the idea as opposed to the idea that Republicans would support nationalizing railroads. At this point in time, just seemed like the case on the government side felt and sounded more hypothetical than actually something that could come to fruition. So yeah, for the affirmative side, I would appreciate greater clarity on the issue of solvency and how it would be possible to achieve to make these bills come to fruition. So based on that, I decided to vote for the opposite team.
One last quick thing I wanted to just point out is I think both sides can do more on the government innovation debate, because we kind of only get a couple warrants deep on there where it's just like, oh, space race, and then like, you know, they throw out China and Japan being better. So I think that part of the debate can really have more development from both sides. But I felt like overall there wasn't enough strong arguments against the government innovation is possible points from the neg side. I'm sorry, from the AF side. So in the future, I think that will be beneficial. But great work to all of you all, and good luck in your future rounds.
Great round, Nick. Good luck, guys.
Thank you all.
Have a good rest of the